Welcome to Voices in the Wilderness, conversations about church and leader health. Thank you so much for listening. We encourage you to keep the conversation going. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org. We also welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org. My name is Marcus Carlson, and today our guests are Jen Binford and Joe Oliver. Welcome, Joe and Jen.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. We're diving in still on these habits of healthy leaders. Had a great conversation about habit 4. So today, talking about habit 5. Healthy leaders have boundaries. And so looking forward to. They do. Yeah, we believe they do. Yes.
Okay.
I'm not saying that all leaders have boundaries. I'm saying healthy leaders have boundaries. But that's a tricky word in the church. So it'll be fun to talk about this for a little bit. So let's just dive in. So the word boundaries can be interpreted a lot of different ways. Also can be used as a weapon. So how do you define this word as a leader, especially as a leader who follows Jesus?
Go for it, Joe.
Yeah. Well, I think, I start off with how do we see Jesus modeling boundaries in his own life? And one of the areas that just comes top of mind was his ability to find a quiet place up on the mountain to pray. Right. So he had a boundary away from his friends or his ministry, we might say, so he could recharge, so he could center himself in the Father. And so it seems to be that Jesus modeled a level of boundaries in the midst of his leadership. And so for me, I look at this idea of boundaries as critical to the success of any leader. Now, we're talking about church leadership, so it gets exponentially more complicated in churches because you are not simply working with employees, you're working with volunteers, you're working with attendees, you're working with people that rely on a pastor for emotional, spiritual, physical support in some capacity. And man, that gets overwhelming. And so boundaries is critical for any healthy leader to be successful long term. I think boundaries is probably more about longevity than it is about the short term, because boy, when I started out, I was 21 and I could conquer the world. There was nothing I couldn't do.
And
And I
Jesus
never
needed
stopped.
you.
Yeah, right. So there's a side of it where if you want a short term run in ministry, right, don't have any boundaries. If you actually want to make this something that has some life and longevity, you need to learn what your boundaries are and how to stick to them.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Jen, what about you? How do you define this word?
Well, the word that's coming to, well, 2 words are coming to mind. One is limits, like knowing your limits. And even as you were talking about making time away, like even just our sleep patterns, like there's a limit to the amount of time that you physically can even exist every day. So it's already built into the ordering of creation that we have to rest. And so to value limits, I guess. And just when we were talking in the habit before about self-awareness, like be self-aware of what your limits are as a human. That some of us are very high capacity people and some of us aren't. And that's okay, but know where your limits are. And then also, if we also say that we are people who value relational connection, so say our families, right? That you have to have healthy limits in your time of where your focus is. And what I'm coming to notice, especially working with the homeless population, it's an endless need. When you're in ministry, the need is endless. And there is always 400 more things to be doing. So I could spend every waking hour in that space of ministry. But there's a limit because I also value health in all aspects, and particularly relational health. So I would say limits, but also another word that comes to mind is expectations. So when you're talking about a healthy relational, like even a team of, because our staff, for example, where I serve is huge, that we need healthy expectations that are shared by one another. Otherwise, we can unintentionally be causing relational strain and harm and hindering ministry when we don't have shared expectations of how we engage with one another or whatever it is. Process, for example, I know that one's probably coming at some point because I know that's a healthy habit of churches, right?
Yeah, I think the word that actually comes to my mind is love, right?
Mm-hmm.
That boundaries are a natural part of love. That I love my children, and so I've set some boundaries for them. My wife loves me, and I tell you, she set some boundaries for me. I don't always listen to them, but she set them nonetheless, right? That I think that, and so setting boundaries for ourselves is a natural part of self-love. And we are called to
Mm-hmm.
love ourselves, right? It's not just love God, love others. It's as you love yourself. And so I do think boundaries are huge in terms of they're a part of self-love that, and we, if we don't set boundaries, we do end up unhealthy. And then what are we giving people? But I do think, lately, we had no boundaries in the church or in the culture, and now everything's a boundary. So I think we've swung to the extremes a little bit to say, okay, like sometimes people use boundaries as an excuse not to do a hard thing or have a hard conversation. Yet I'd rather that than where we have been, which is there's just no boundaries. And I think in the church, it's like, well, if you're saying no to a church member, you're kind of saying no to the baby Jesus. It's just not true. But I think there's this inherent piece of that. And I always tell people when I set boundaries, the two groups that get the most angry are church people and extended family. And, but though I think they're huge. And so I love what you guys have said about this.
Do you think I wondered, this is my thought, and maybe you guys, your input is the issue isn't a church leader wanting to have a boundary. The issue is them feeling safe and actually communicating it. I wonder if intuitively we all have an idea of like, this is my space. And I wonder if church leaders I've talked to where they're like, if it feels like almost like it's unsafe for them to actually communicate a boundary. Does that make
I think that's
sense?
true in some cases, but I don't think it's universally true. I think there genuinely are some people in leadership and ministry and not that don't even recognize or understand the concept of boundaries
Hmm.
and don't even see the need for them. Not like intentionally
Boundaries with
so.
others or self?
Yes. Yes.
Both?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
more so self, but
Okay.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think again, like I do think that's this, this culture of constantly being on and constantly having to say yes and constantly have to produce. And I think that it's even more significant in the church than it is um, outside the church in the secular, cultural, corporate business world, however you want to say that.
Yeah. The
Well, and
hardest thing I ever learned was no.
mhm.
I still don't know how to say no half the time. Like everything's a yes for me because I don't want to let people down. I don't want to discourage. I don't want to. I care and I do care. Like that's half the problem. Is like I would love to do everything. I'm practicing no in this year of my life, saying no to things that I like to do, so I can say yes to the greater things, as the
Mhm.
old adage says. But I don't know. For me, it's the no. Like our ability to say no is really hard. It is for me.
Bingo.
Yeah,
Jen.
I, I wonder if a piece of this too is just an awareness that there is a need for boundaries. And also we have tendencies, some of us, to be more selfish. And then there's others that tend to be more like what you're saying, Joe, who are like yes to everything. And there's a place for health where there's limits again. Like, for example, even just this morning, so the lobby at the church where I serve, there's probably 25 people that are still there when I was there. And earlier, when this particular situation happened, that we need to, the limit is you can be in the lobby because the rest of the space isn't supervised, right? And then when somebody comes and asks me to speak with a pastor, okay, well, here's the options of what that looks like, because this particular person was a male and asking me to go and have a private conversation, right? I'm like, no, we're not going to do that, but I'd be happy to talk with you here in this realm and in this realm. So sometimes it's a safety issue, sometimes it's a health, like emotional issue, or a sanity issue, or relational. Like there's limits to my yes. Like, yes, within this boundary. And afterwards, I thanked the other people who were on staff and a part of that, like reinforcing the boundary, because it needs, yes, we're here to offer spiritual care, but within this realm. So, yeah.
So
Anyway,
why is this, what makes this habit so important? Like, as we've kind of verbally processed this and from your experience, what makes this habit so important?
I think it can serve as, in some capacity, a protection for yourself. I'm thinking internally. I guess that's how I'm kind of like boundaries for myself as a church leader. I'm putting myself in the church leader shoes. What are the boundaries I need to put in place for my family, for my own sanity, to act out in a healthy way from a place of rest and wholeness, instead of tiredness and burnout, whatever. And so what was your question? I'm sorry.
Why is this habit so important?
There you go. If you want longevity, I said that at the start, that you have to have an understanding of what boundaries need to be in your life in order that you can sustain what God is leading you into.
and for the impact, honestly, because even if you're sustaining in a state of burnout, you're actually not fully giving, you potentially could be causing harm, right? So, and as you were sharing, like one of the things I was thinking about when you're thinking about internal and self boundaries is even within your own thoughts, like how much power are you giving to when other people give you lots and lots of feedback, right? And how much of your headspace are you giving? And then one other thing I was thinking as I was listening is the unhealthy expectation that somehow is rooted in the belief that we just give and give and give and give and give, and don't have our own needs. So to be mindful and self-aware, what are my needs of also, so that I do have greater capacity when I am with people. And that's, like you had mentioned before, time away on your own. And for me, it's going roller skating or whatever it is, to make sure that you're making time for that. But the other piece of it is what I was thinking about, why it's so important with boundaries with groups of people, is because without boundaries within groups, you end up with unhealthy cultures and unhealthy systems of interactions. So, an example of this would be conflict, right? So, if we don't have boundaries and expectations that are shared around how we do conflict well, so say Joe and I have an issue, a conflict with one another, and I don't go to Joe directly and I go to Marcus and
Yep.
unintentionally, I have broken relationship with Marcus and Joe, and it just spreads, and it spreads a cancer underneath the system. And so there has to be boundaries relationally, as well of honoring one another and honoring relational repair. And then even like with our time, like, hey, it's Saturday at 4 p.m. and I'm at my kids' gymnastics meet. Why are you texting and emailing me and expecting me to respond this minute? Like just having healthy expectations and boundaries, whether it's internally for my own sanity, but also how we function together. Yeah, because we're called to live into health and wholeness. So
Awesome.
there's my musings.
Any other suggestions you guys would give leaders for setting clear and healthy boundaries here in the next couple minutes that we have?
If you're working on a church team, talk to your your pastor, your leader. If you're and have that conversation. Hey, I'm feeling this. What are some healthy ways that I can move forward, adding some boundaries in my life? Start the conversation somewhere. If you're a lead pastor, go. If you have an eldership or some kind of board, go to them. Like, just have the conversation. Start somewhere to say, I'm feeling this, recognize what's going on, and then go to someone that has a place of influence in your life and start the conversation.
And I would say one of the indicators of a need to potentially set a boundary is the intensity level that you're feeling of an emotion. So, say there's a situation or something just keeps recurring here, or whatever the circumstances, if the intensity is so high that you are experiencing dysregulation, just sit in it and listen to the spirit. Like, what is behind that? What is causing that? And just notice. And then, if needed, that might be where you potentially ask a safe person for self-awareness, or what might a healthy boundary be. And the example that I had mentioned before when Joe was talking about internal state, sometimes what I do is, because I do strive to have relational order. If somebody has criticized me or has created a narrative that may not be true, I just keep replaying it over and over and over and over and over. And then I can't fall asleep. And then it wakes me up at 4 a.m. And then, you know, that I have to set a boundary just even within my own thought space. And so just notice, I guess, the level of intensity of emotions that you're experiencing. And that may be an indicator that a boundary might need to be set, either within yourself, within your time, or with other people.
That is great advice. Hey, thank you both so much for doing this and continuing to walk on this journey of the habits of healthy leaders.
Of course. Happy to be here.
Always.
Awesome. Thank you for listening. Again, we encourage you to keep the conversation going, especially with these habits of healthy leaders. We're using these podcast episodes to help shape the book that we are writing about this very topic. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org to learn more. Again, we welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org.